Hi, welcome to my shop. This is where I do most of my custom work. This shop isn't much to look at, but it's where I do all the magic. This is where it all happens. Right next to me is my cam machine, and behind me is the computer. And what we're going to do in this sequence is show how I turn the drawing into actual pieces. So let's get started on that. Well, here we are looking at Vector. This is the program I use to allow the cam machine to plot what it has to do. Sorry about the brown lines flashing across the screen. I'm actually videoing the screen. I know there's a higher tech way to do this, but this is an old machine and it's running an old operating system, and I can't get the software to do it. So, what we're looking at here is the 36 outline pieces that are all in vector format of all the black mother of pearl needed for Odin himself. There's some more that are needed for the wolves and some others, but these are the main ones. Now here's some of the steps I need to do. One of the things I need to do here is I'm going to highlight everything and transfer it all and break it all up into little bitty pieces. So if I zoom in on just one of these, you'll be able to see that it's broken into a bunch of lines. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to each piece and I'm going to set the toolpath around it. And I usually like to go left to right, it's the easiest way. Another little piece of housekeeping, which I'm not going to bother to explain at the moment. So what I do is I grab the piece and I decide how far away from the piece the tool should travel. And this gives it an offset. And now, once I have the offset, I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call it P1 for piece 1, very simply. And I'm going to select what tool it's supposed to use. And I'm going to set it. And it now has a tool path to cut that particular piece. And we can actually see this in a little bit more interesting format. Let's just zoom in on this. And you can see what it's done here is the toolpath will actually start here, come down, cut around this piece twice, which is usually the format I use for shell, and then exit back up. And by doing this, I now have told the computer how to cut this piece. Or the cam machine. The computer is going to tell the cam machine how to cut this piece. Now I have to do that for every single piece. Now a lot of times it's actually easier to cut the piece by hand. It's quicker to actually cut the piece by hand, because if I just go to my default set, if I just go to my top setting, you'll see that there's a lot of pieces I have to do this to. But the advantage of doing this with the cam machine is twofold. One, the accuracy of the piece is going to be far greater than I can do by hand. And two, if for some reason the piece is to chip or break or I lose it, I can easily go in here, find the piece, and recut the perfect piece. Well, while we were off camera, I went ahead and did all the rest of the tool paths for all our other 35 pieces, and now it's time to actually start cutting. And what I'm going to be using is this material right here. This is a shell veneer, which is basically like shell plywood. This actually is shell. It's made of shell. What they do is they take little thin pieces of shell and they make this big long piece that I can use to cut out 36 pieces at one time. It's absolutely a boon to the inlay artist. Absolutely fantastic. And it actually allows us to do things we couldn't do otherwise. For instance, you can see how big this piece is. This is actually 9.5 by 5 1/4. And this is the size of the piece of the shell that usually it comes from. You can see just how much smaller this one is. So if I had to make all those 36 pieces out of this, there would be so much waste. So this is great for the people who are in the green and recycling and all that. This actually uses a lot less material, and it's used pretty much by every inlay artist on the planet. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to put this into my machine. I'm going to clamp it in and get it all ready to roll. And then I'm going to zero the cam machine so it knows where my material is. And I'm going to start cutting. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a little oil on this. Now the oil is very important because it decreases the heat, stops the bit from overheating, and the pieces from cracking. Okay, now we're ready to start cutting. This is kind of where it gets noisy. This cam machine does make a lot of noise. Normally there'd be a lot more noise because I'd be running an air unit to suck up all the dust. For the sake of the shoot right here, I'm not going to do that. And don't worry, because in editing we will lower the volume on this. But in real life the volume is quite a bit higher. Once this starts moving, it's going to cut all 36 pieces and they're all going to be perfect. And we'll just print them out and go to the next step. And that's the end of batch 1. I just cut the last 3 pieces. I have 2 more batches to cut. One of them is just for the wolf, which is only 1 piece, which I haven't even programmed yet. But that's about 30 pieces. And it's taken up a good chunk of a very expensive piece of black mother of pearl. So next step is to put these on the bench and clean them up. Well, we got all the pieces cut. But that's not the end of it. That's kind of more just the start of it. It's 37 pieces altogether. Now what we need to do is clean off all the gook that comes in. You know, you saw me putting oil on there to cool the piece off. Well, that creates, that mixes with the dust and creates all kinds of gook on the piece and all that stuff. And sometimes you got to take a little. This is actually a jeweler's saw with a little tiny wire that I use to get into the little crevices and clean it all out. That all has to be done. And occasionally, not on that piece, but occasionally you get like a little burr that's left by the cam machine. And I'm trying to find one that has one. Here we go. There's a little burr right about in here. You can't even see it, but I can feel it with my finger. And that's going to stop it from fitting really well. So I'm just going to take a high-speed Dremel and just come in real quick and take that burr off. It only takes a second or 2. But I got to do it for every piece. I got to clean them up, get all the gook off them, get them ready to go, take the burrs off. And when you're dealing with 37 pieces, well, it takes a little bit of time. And I'm not going to bore you with having to watch me do the whole thing. So let's move on. Okay, some of the pieces have been cleaned up and deburred. And now it's the point of calling it keeping track of it all. There's 190 some pieces in this thing. And it's really easy to lose some of these pieces because they're so tiny. So what I do is I print out a real size image of the inlay. And then I take rubber cement, which if you're not familiar with rubber cement is just Elmer's rubber cement, nothing fancy. It cements but not real heavy, so you can easily remove it later. It's kind of cool stuff. And what I'm going to do is I find the piece, where the piece goes on the design, and I rubber cement it down. Therefore, I know exactly where it's going to go, and I don't have to worry about losing it or any of the rest of that stuff, and I can eventually see how everything fits together on the design. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. So this is 37 pieces of black mother of pearl, and I've got about 2 hours of work just cutting these. So you can see that an inlay of this complexity does take quite a while to do. Well, see you on the next step. Bye-bye.